the far north of Scotland, there's a huge area of wild country where sometimes there seems to be more water than land.
Remote and windswept, this loch-studded landscape is the North's empty quarter and one of the most sparsely populated areas in Northern Europe. But it wasn't always like this.
Lochs are Scotland's gift to the world and are the product of an element that we have in spectacular abundance: water. It's been estimated that there are more than 31,000 lochs in Scotland. They come in all shapes and sizes, from long fjord-like sea lochs, great freshwater lochs of the Central Highlands, to the innumerable lochans that stud the open moors. In this series, I'm on a loch-hopping journey across Scotland, discovering how they shape the character of the people who live close to their shores. On this grand tour, I'll be travelling under wide skies through a wilderness where life can seem to exist on the margins of what is possible. My journey starts with a train ride to a station in the middle of nowhere, goes with a flow across miles of featureless moorland to a river with a glittering past, then loch hops through space and time to discover why people were pushed to the margins. Journey's end is on the shining sands of a tide-swept beach. I'm crossing a vast expanse of country far from any public road, travelling on Britain's most northerly railway line, which connects the towns of Caithness to the cities of the south.
This is Altnabrec, one of Britain's remotest railway stations. Now, when you get off the train here, you really are in the middle of nowhere. It's 10 kilometres to the nearest road, 39 kilometres to the nearest supermarket, and a very long way indeed to the nearest pub.
Meeting me at the deserted platform at Altnabrec station is retired rail worker Lewis Sinclair, who spent 32 years walking the line, maintaining the track in this lonely corner of the rail network. And when the winter snows hit hard, this is how they kept the trains running in the 1970s.
That was them trying to open the track after a big snowstorm. The train had got buried.
Good grief. It's completely buried.
Completely buried. It would have been over 20 feet at that time. They were stuck on and they put the whole Saturday night, Sunday morning on the train, and then the helicopters came and rescued the people off the train.
That's a great shot. That's a snowplow.
Yep. Yeah. That's a small plough.
That's a small one.
That's a small one.
And that's a big plough, is it?
That's a big plough. Yeah.
Well, the depths of the snow there, 15-foot drift.
That's the one that got buried. Just.
The snowplow got buried?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There.
How would you get it out once you found it?
It was dig.
Moving hundreds of tons of snow.
They had a good big squad.
A chain gang.
Yeah, a chain gang.
Amazing winters in those days.
Oh yeah. Oh, they'd be cut off for quite a time here. I remember they were cut off for 6 weeks at one time.
Lewis heads home by train, down the track that he tended most of his working life. And I continue my journey by foot through almost unimaginably gloomy weather. The view ahead is obscured by clouds hanging in the treetops, which seem to press in on me from either side. I come at last to the first loch on my journey, Loch Dew, the Black Loch. Dominating the eerie scene is one of the hunting lodges that the station was built to serve. At one time, it was at the centre of a vast sporting estate, but the guns are silent now, and today it's a private house.
Despite the grandeur, there's definitely something spooky about this place.
And I can't help thinking that the house really would make a great location for a horror movie.
So I'll not tarry long on the shores of Loch Dew.
With a quickening step, I gladly leave the trees and the dark loch behind, and the landscape suddenly opens out under wide skies, so typical of Caithness. The country here is full of Gaelic place names, a reminder of an earlier way of life before the coming of the railway and sporting landlords.
Now, most of my knowledge of Gaelic actually comes from Ordnance Survey maps. And I happen to know that the loch behind me is called Loch Avulan, which means the mill loch. And the wee burn that flows from it is marked on the map here as Altavulan, or the mill stream, which indicates there would have been a mill here at one time. The question is, where is it?
I'm not looking for the remains of a big old-fashioned mill with a large vertical water wheel, but something much simpler. That's because the traditional type of mill used here was a very primitive affair and little changed over many centuries, and was common in Scandinavia, Scotland and Ireland. A simple demonstration can show how even a wee burn like this can be harnessed to turn a millstone. No need for huge water wheels for these Highlanders.
Now, as you can see, we spared absolutely no expense in building this replica horizontal water mill. It's basically an axle with some paddles on it, and it works. When it's immersed in the burn here, when it fills up with water, the wheel magically begins to turn, enabling you to grind your barley and your oats or whatever into meal between the two stones that would have been up there on top of the axle. Now, the whole structure would have been housed in a building not much bigger than a garden shed, which would have straddled the burn. It's very simple, very primitive, but really effective.
Unfortunately, I can't find the remains of the mill that gave its name to this burn. In fact, it's hard to imagine anyone living here. But this wasn't always a wilderness. And we have the evidence to prove it in this fascinating, if slightly unwieldy atlas. Named after the man who made it, it's called Roy's Great Map and was commissioned by the victorious government army after the Battle of Culloden in 1746.
According to Roy's military map, back in the 18th century there were several communities out here with names like Dalwhinnan, Dalnahar and even the Glut. But there's nothing left of this now forgotten way of life. In fact, today, this is more like a human desert.
Continuing through this wilderness, I enter an increasingly remote landscape. Here, the ground becomes ever more waterlogged, stretching as far as the eye can see. There are lochs and pools everywhere. This watery mosaic is all part of a vast peat bog known as the Flow Country.
The name Flow Country was first used to describe these wide open but rather soggy spaces by surveyors from the Nature Conservancy Council in the 1950s. Now, they recognised the unique importance of this environment and used the old Norse word flow, meaning a flat, marshy area, to describe this fabulous wilderness.
I want to investigate the nature of this vast tract of the Flow Country, which covers a total area of 2,000 square kilometres of northern Scotland. Roxanne Anderson is a scientist who specialises in peat, the stuff that makes up most of what you see out here. Along with her field technician, whose name happens to be Pete, they show me how a peat bog is an accumulation of dead plants that haven't fully decomposed due to the waterlogged conditions.
Roxanne, we're standing on blanket bog, so it's smothering the landscape.
Absolutely,
Really. That is the blanket
just
side.
Covering, and this is why they're called blankets. It really is just covering the whole landscape. It is the largest blanket bog in Europe, and potentially even the largest in the world.
So it's really significant.
It is. Another aspect that's really significant is the amount of carbon that is stored in the peatlands. This is significant in, for example, Scotland's fight against climate change, because if we have peatland in good condition that enables the carbon to be stored, then it helps to reduce the amount of carbon that's emitted in the atmosphere.
Roxanne is keen to show me how the peat not only locks in carbon, but is also a record of the climate in the past. To see into history, peat first takes a core sample of, well, the peat.
This is for the top of the 50 centimetres, so you're looking at the most recent vegetation to the oldest.
So 50 centimetres wouldn't be, a few hundred years maybe.
A few hundred years,
Yeah.
but that's amazing. That's incredibly well preserved.
And you can still see all the vegetation.
And then by the time you get a bit deeper, there's hardly anything at all. Is it completely decayed away?
It's much more
No, look.
decomposed, but even at the very bottom you can still find remains of plants, and that's one of the interesting thing about peat, is that if you know how to read it, it's basically like a history book of what happened in this landscape for the last 10,000 years.
And the vegetation over the thousands of years would have changed, would it? Or have you got the same vegetation growing here all that time?
It has changed a little bit. About 5,000 years ago, there was a period of the climate that was a bit warmer and drier that allowed pine to rise.
Really?
But then it got wet again, and so we can see the rise and fall of the pine in the peat as well.
So as the climate got wetter, it would have killed off the pine forest?
Yeah.
Today, this blanket bog is recognised as both an important carbon sink and a very special habitat for flora and fauna. But this wasn't always the case. In recent decades, the flow country was severely damaged by afforestation, and huge plantations of spruce and pine still blight the landscape. The legacy of government policy in the 1970s and 80s, when the super-rich were encouraged to tax dodge by investing in tree planting. Many peat bogs were drained, and the rivers that they fed were starved. Even worse, there was a scheme to exploit the peat on an industrial scale and turn it into electricity. 60 years ago, these huge mechanical beasts crawling over the bog were deemed a symbol of improvement. Jim Johnson helps me to paint a picture of a very different period of flow country history.
Jim, can you describe what this amazing contraption is there? I mean, it looks like a tank with a garden shed on the top.
There would be a number of machines like this one, which would be ditching the bog and picking up the milled peat off the surface.
And why were they milling the peat?
To supply heating material to a very large power station, which was standing just a few thousand yards or so away, which was operating on a very modern system, a closed cycle gas turbine. And the idea was that you would clear that peat completely while generating all this electricity, and then you would create farms on the cleared ground. The purpose of it was to make something better out of what they regarded as the wastelands of peat. In the end, it didn't run properly, which was rather a shame.
But of course, these days we see peat as valuable in its own right for different reasons. Because of global warming, it's seen as a carbon sink and perhaps a defence against global warming.
There's no doubt that global warming is occurring, and that keeping carbon locked up was a very good idea. And there are huge areas of the world just now, in the muskeg of Canada and the tundra of Russia, where that's not happening, and the CO2 is being released and methane is bubbling out of the ground, So we need to look out for that.
This machine is absolutely fantastic. It's like a Mad Max machine, isn't it?
Yes, it is like that, yes.
No thought of global warming, of course, in those days.
In those days, the worry was that there was going to be another ice age, rather than that things were going to heat up.
It's incredible what a difference a few decades can make to our perception of the landscape. The flow country has gone from being seen as a wasteland to being seriously considered as a World Heritage Site. If peat were once regarded as a version of black gold, then a few miles to the south, is the real stuff. This is the Kildonan Burn, which drains from the Lochs and bogs of the Flow Country. The Gaelic name for this place is Ballianore, Gold Town, and remarkably, it was home to Scotland's very own 19th century gold rush. Yvonne Creedy tells me how locals still pan for gold for very special occasions and shows me how it's done.
Get rid of some of these bigger stones, so we're getting down to finer and finer sands here.
Yeah, and you want the black sand. That's what holds the gold.
Have you found much gold, Yvonne, up here?
Yes, got my ring made from it.
You got a ring made of
Yes.
Kildonan gold, is that it?
Wedding ring, yes.
And that was made from gold found in this river?
Yes.
So you're married to the river as well?
I suppose
As to
you
your
could say-
husband?
I suppose you could
That's
say
beautiful.
that. I don't
That's
know.
really special, isn't it?
It certainly is, yeah. Not many people would go and do that for their intendeds. There's a story, a Helmsdale lass and lad, if they wanted to get married, she would say to him, go and pan for the ring in Kildonan. So, of course, he's thinking, oh, yeah, he probably thought, oh, this is going to be a doddle, it's just water. But by the time you've coped with the midges, your back, which you'll be feeling in
it's
a minute.
nipping a bit.
Aye. And the cold and just general things, panning down. He can make up his mind whether she was worth it or not.
Right.
And if she was worth it, she got her gold and she got her ring. So I think I must have been worth it.
You must have been. See here?
That's a bit of gold.
That
yes,
is gold, isn't it?
yes.
That is gold.
Yes.
We found gold. This is really amazing. How often do you find it? I mean, is it every once in a blue moon? Am I exceptionally lucky?
It could
That's
be.
amazing, look.
Well, where there's one piece, I think you probably attract it. Spin it round, you've got more. You see?
Oh, look at
There
that.
you go.
Is that all gold?
That's all gold there, yes.
That's Kildonan gold. Not enough to make a ring, but enough to make me feel very happy. It's brilliant, Yvonne.
Enriched by the experience and thrilled by my gold find, I head for my next destination, Strathnaver, and the beautiful and melancholy Lochnaver.
Walking through Strathnaver is like taking a hike through history. I can't think of a better guide to the area than Roy's old military map. I just wish there was a pocket-sized version of the thing. But it gives an absolutely fascinating insight into what this area was like some 250 years ago. And there have been some very significant changes.
Roy's map really is a beautiful piece of work, but it also provides evidence for a great human tragedy. We've already seen that the map shows settlements that are no longer here. And as I continue my journey, the absences seem to haunt the whole landscape.
Now you can see from the map that Roy has mapped several villages along the Loch side and further north up Strathnaver. Now many of these places no longer exist. They and the inhabitants vanished long ago, and all thanks to the greatest and perhaps the worst landlord in Highland history, the Duke of Sutherland.
The name Sutherland is synonymous with the brutal Highland clearances of the 19th century.
But the Highland clearances started out as part of a programme of agricultural improvements. Now the idea was to give over the good, fertile land to large-scale and efficient sheep farms, and to move the people who lived here to the coast, where they were expected to take up fishing.
In Strathnaver and across the county of Sutherland, over 15,000 tenants of the Duke were evicted from their homes, all in the name of progress. As the sheep moved in, the 13 families who lived here at Rossall were moved out.
The only evidence that people ever lived here are these few scattered stones, but eyewitnesses from the time reported savage cruelty and destruction on an almost biblical scale. Now this was written by Donald MacLeod, who published a horrifying account of events. All the houses in an extensive district were in flames at once. I counted 250. Little or no time was given for the removal of persons or property. The people striving to remove the sick and the helpless before the fire should reach them. The cries of the women and children, the roaring of the affrighted cattle altogether presented a scene that completely baffles description.
As for the Duke of Sutherland and his agents, they described what happened as a benevolent action necessary humanely to order the new arrangement of this country. The legacy of this arrangement continues in the empty wilderness left in its wake. The suffering of the people of Strathnaver has put me in a serious and reflective mood as I continue to my next destination, tiny Loch Monair. In legend, Monair is the name of an ancient Celtic water goddess.
Legend has it that the waters of this tiny wee loch have wondrous healing powers. And in the old days, people came from all over the north seeking cures for diseases that had baffled all medical skill. Now, given my own rather precarious state of health, that sounds a wee bit like a queue for a dunk, although I have to say, I'm not particularly relishing the prospect. That looks decidedly chilly. Ooh.
I have to say that for a spa resort, Loch Monair isn't what I would have expected. It's totally deserted, and the fabled waters of this northern Lourdes might look blue and clear, but boy, are they chilly.
Now, according to tradition, you have to perform certain rituals for a cure to be effective. And the first of these is to make an offering to the goddess of the loch. And custom had it that you threw in a silver coin. Now, I've got 20 pence here. I'm just hoping that's going to be enough. There we go. Next, you had to call out your disease and then dunk your head under the water 3 times. So, it's very embarrassing, but please, goddess, cure me of my unfortunate verruca. 3 times. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. I've actually found something here. It looks like an old coin from a previous visit to the loch. Now, also legend has it that your offering has to be a fresh one, otherwise you would acquire the disease of the person who threw this in. So I think this is dirty money. Now, I feel a whole lot better already, and I can feel that verruca rapidly disappearing.
Perhaps the experience of chilly Loch Monair has had a positive effect on me after all. I have a spring in my step as I head for the next loch on this grand tour, and a body of salty Atlantic water on the cold northern coast of Scotland.
I'm speaking about the Kyle of Tongue, a shallow arm of the sea that splits the land on either side and penetrates into the flow country towards the magnificent peak of Ben Loyal.
Apparently, tongue comes from the old language of the Vikings when they held sway in these northern parts. The Norse word tunga means, tongue, and refers to the tongue-shaped spit of land that projects across the loch, almost dividing it in 2. Today, the tongue carries the road bridge that spans the Kyle. I'm here to learn about a little-known episode in Scottish history. The year is 1746. The Highlands is awash with rebel Jacobites, supporters of the exiled Stuart kings under the leadership of Bonnie Prince Charlie. Opposing them, is the Hanoverian government in London. It's just a few weeks before the culminating action of the whole era, the Battle of Culloden. A French ship loaded with gold and guns, destined for the Jacobite army, sails into this Kyle, pursued by a heavily armed British frigate. In the ensuing engagement, there was much at stake. Would the Jacobites get their desperately needed supplies, and what happened to all that gold? Local farmer and keen historian Alan Mackay helps me speculate about a wee battle, no more than a skirmish, that could have had huge consequences.
Who knows what would have happened if the gold had got to Inverness? Changed the course of history.
Well, I was going to say, because in many ways, what happened here could have been a tipping point in history.
Yes, I mean, it's a lot of gold. It was £13,000 worth.
So is there any evidence of the battle that took place here?
There's cannonballs.
Cannonballs?
Cannonballs have been
Right.
recovered. There's, around here they were found and stuck into the rock.
Into the rock
rocks.
crevices?
There was a cannonball recovered, which I actually happen to have in my hand here.
A genuine cannonball fired by, presumably, the Royal Navy, firing
Yes.
at the Jacobites. Good grief.
Alan tells me how the Jacobites abandoned their heavily bombarded ship and made a desperate bid to get their precious cargo of gold away from the British soldiers who were in hot pursuit.
The two parties met at Loch and this is where the gold was supposedly deposited.
Do you think there's gold there?
There was a cow appeared in with a gold coin stuck between its cleats and its feet. The coin does exist, I believe, in Dunrobin Castle.
Does it?
So I think if there's any gold in the loch, they'd have recovered it, the people in the area. I don't think you'd have been sitting thinking there's gold in there, would you?
No.
No.
I guess you're right. It would have been discovered long ago.
Yes.
It's an amazing relic you've got here. I've
Interesting,
never
isn't
been
it?
so close to Jacobite history before in such a physical,
Yeah.
tangible way.
It is,
It's great. It's a shame about the gold, though. Did it find its way into the community,
Well,
do you
there
think?
was a family which did become very wealthy,
Right.
and it wasn't my family.
It wasn't your family. That's very tragic.
It is, yes.
Leaving Alan, I wander out across the beautiful sands of the Kyle. It's hard to imagine that a fortune was brought here and then lost again beneath these wide skies. Countless tides have ebbed and flowed since then, of course, almost washing away the memory of those turbulent times when a fortune destined for a prince could have changed history.
There might not be any Jacobite gold to be found here, but this is surely compensation and a view to treasure. Ben Loyal, in all its magnificence, is absolutely priceless, making this the perfect place for me to end my grand tour through the Flow Country.
I'm on the trail of Robert the Bruce for my next grand tour, which takes me to the hidden lochs of Galloway.